Welcome to the Bariatric Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Lloyd, mindset mentor, somatic coach, and transformational guide for those on the path to true healing. Whether you've had weight loss surgery or on GLP-1s or simply seeking a new way forward with food and your body, this space is for you. This podcast is a mission to change the narrative, unlearning the patterns that no longer serve you, moving beyond quick fixes into deep, embodied healing, lasting mindset shifts, and true self-leadership. We are healing from the roots, rewiring the mind, regulating the body, and returning home to ourselves. We are here for growth rooted in honesty and self-trust because that, my friends, is the foundation of healing. So grab your cup of joe or your H2O and let's go. All right, everybody. This is Dr. Kristen, and I'm here with Frances Vogel, Bariatric Mindset Coach, and we are here once again for the Bariatric Mindset Success Podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the stories and the narratives that keep you stuck in old patterns and that keep you from healing, and how you can work on shifting your narrative and your story to promote healing. Are you with me? I'm so excited about this, Frances.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here again, and I look forward to seeing where this episode takes us.
So, as we were talking about this, that, it came out originally was, what's your story? And I think what's your story can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And I wanted to be clear that this was a story about to get right into it, the BS that we tell ourselves about why we can't, why we should, why we shouldn't, why we're doing something, why we're not doing something, why we're stuck. And a lot of times those become self-fulfilling prophecies, or they go into a victim mindset, or they become very much driven by someone's conditioning or their past or their childhood, or even diet culture, which we've spent a couple episodes on, or their past trauma or identity wounds, using food to soothe, food as safety, food as coping, or I'm just like this. And that becomes part of a deeply entrenched narrative, and it breeds mistrust and distrust for individuals. And I wanted to bring this up because I think our self-talk is so important for our growth. And what I notice, self-talk is one part of the journey, but we're always telling stories. We're telling stories to each other. We're telling stories about our experiences. And I don't mean stories as in fiction. There are truths, right? So there are truths in a lot of ways. So it's not that we're telling untruths to ourselves, but what we think, right? Feelings are not facts. What we're thinking about something is our perception, and our perception of our experiences, while they feel like our truth in a lot of ways, they can be shifted. We can see things from another perspective. We can challenge our perspective, and that's when growth happens. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and kind of dig in, because, we don't grow in the shallows. We don't grow in the kiddie pool. We grow on the deep end,
Absolutely, Kristen. And I think that, there's so many of us that get stuck in the stories that we were told as children and young adults. Either our parents tell us, our teachers tell us, our siblings tell us. And so we believe that to be true. And then we go into our adult lives and we manifest that. And then we get, 40, 50 years down the line and realize how unhappy we actually are, but we don't know where to start. So I think that we're all here because we've had issues with our weight. That is what's brought us to where we are today. We are struggling with some type of food, weight, body image, something or another. And so where did it all begin? And this isn't, an opportunity for us to delve into past traumas, but it's to delve into what are you thinking about when you sit down to a table about the food that's set forth in front of you? So when I was reading over kind of the things that you were talking about and that you were wanting us to kind of discuss, I was thinking about what is a story I've told myself over the years. And we did talk a lot about this in our diet mentality and eating disordered episodes. So this is going to be a little bit of a follow-up to that. And even, there might be some parts that are repetitive, but I want to tell a story about being a younger adult and really not feeling comfortable eating certain foods in front of other people, because the narrative I told myself, because someone else told me, was that you're fat and you can't eat those foods. They're off limits. And so that kept me stuck in fear of food. And so there was no way I was going to get to food freedom or having an opportunity to look at food as sustenance, because I was afraid of food. I was afraid of any food that wasn't stuck in the diet box. I love French fries. They are one of my absolute favorite foods. And growing up, that was one of those things that fat people ate. That's what I was told. Because you like French fries, that's what fat people eat. And because you're fat, you should never eat French fries. To this day, that is one of the things when we go out to eat, I will order them, or I'll have my spouse order them, and we will share them. And they're wonderful and they're great. And they are part of my daily whatever. And I don't eat out every day, so I'm not eating them every day, but it's part of my experience. I was telling you, I make homemade pizza and I love it. And it's because I've got to a place where I can have food freedom, and how you get there is changing the narrative of what you think and how you think about the food that you put in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. I, as you were talking about your story, I was thinking about a lot of my stories and even the stories that I've heard other people tell. So the things that I've heard other people tell are things like, I'm addicted to sugar, or food is my comfort, or I can't help it, or I can't stay out of the kitchen or the cabinets, or I'm never, right? So those polarizing thoughts. Some other things that we kind of came up with here that I'm going to read, and then I'll get to some of mine. The villain story, food is the enemy. There's the savior story, food is my comfort or my safe space. The scarcity story, I have to eat it all now because I won't get it later. The shame story, I have no willpower, I'll always fail. The fantasy story, when I finally lose weight, then I'll be happy, free, or loved. So, and that last one, it's like weight loss is so much equated with attaining that seems unattainable. And, we kind of said some of these are built on childhood conditioning, culture, trauma, diet rules, reinforced by repeated experiences, or the stories like, oh, I'm not allowed to have that. Like you said, fat people shouldn't be eating that, right? So the shame focus. And I think my story was not necessarily one, it was, I don't have control, or I have no self-control, or this wasn't a story that I told, it was an observation. Once I start, I can't stop. And I think that I did tell myself a story about weight, which was similar to that fantasy story. When I lose weight, then I'll have this. Because a lot of the story that I heard growing up was, nobody's going to want you. Nobody's going to love you. You won't be successful unless you're thin. So there was all of this superiority attached to thinness. And I think that's part of the narrative. But I also want to address the narratives that can come from other places too. So even fitness narratives, or narratives that come from depression, like why bother? I've already failed. Or if it comes to movement, it could be everybody's judging me, right? There could be a lot of assumptions, or what is this going to do? So one of the stories, well, this is a true story, but one of the things that happened during college, this was way before surgery, and I posted about this on social media, is I was so determined at one point in time to work out and go to the gym. And it was very difficult for me to get up in the morning. And this was like, I had many years. I had a lot of time where I was undiagnosed ADHD and didn't even realize it. So I would drag my butt to the gym with just about 5 minutes to work out before I'd had to take a shower and go to work. So it wasn't there. So some people might say, why bother? I think that doing that and my determination that one of these days I'll actually have 20 minutes on the elliptical. There was another story that I was telling. There were two different stories or two different narratives kind of happening. One was, I just need to get myself there. And the other one was, if I get myself there enough, I might even get myself there earlier enough to do something. And I think there are so many people, far more than the story that I just suggested, far more that say, why bother? I'm not going to go for 5 minutes, and then don't go. And then as a result of not going at all, even for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or doing anything in their house or whatever, that they create a narrative and a story about what's possible for them on a fitness journey or when it comes to exercise. So then it's what's possible, or let's say donuts in the break room at work. So if, I work from home, so I don't have a break room. But when I did, it could be people bringing food in. What's the story that we are telling ourselves about the break room food? Or what's the story that we're telling ourselves about a dinner out? And when there is diet mentality, there's a lot of narratives and a lot of stories. So when we think of being on this journey towards health and wellness, it's not just losing weight. It's literally changing an entire paradigm, changing an entire way of thinking where, food isn't the enemy, your body isn't the enemy. And yet when you're so frustrated and you're trying to quote unquote do it all right, it's, most people don't ask the questions to themselves. They ask it to someone else. So, am I doing this right? So we kind of
external validation.
Yes, external validation. And we're seeking, it's not even approval, but am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough this? Am I getting enough that? And we're outsourcing it's not just macros though. We're outsourcing, it's not approval. We want to know, are we doing it right? And yet it shows me that either we don't know enough about nutrition or about movement in terms of health, which is why I want to educate, which is why we're here right now, is to educate that these things are very important and that it's not about perfection. But again, diet culture has pretty much indoctrinated us that we have to do it a certain way or we're doing it wrong.
And that's, I think you're absolutely right. I think that we're not looking nearly enough in the grays and taking ownership of the actions that we're taking by not going. I'm going to use the gym as an example.
Yeah,
you're saying stop because you're choosing not to go because you only have 5 minutes. Instead of saying, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes today because that's all I've got. And then working and building on that. There is an amazing book that I read, I don't know, 5 years ago, I guess, or so. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about building those little habits that are going, it's baby steps, baby steps. And sometimes they're nano steps in the right direction.
Just putting your shoes on.
Getting out. And I tell people all the time in coaching, just put your workout clothes on. You're more likely to work out if you have your workout clothes on. You are, and even if it's walking down the road and back, you're more likely to exercise if you have your tennis shoes on than if you have to make the effort. It can go to getting up and dressing nicely for work the next day. I made recommendations for my kids when they were at home and they had school the next day, and it was every morning we had these issues. Put your clothes out the night before. These are simple tasks that you can do that can help build good habits, and so that you're changing the narrative. Because here's the part that we don't address enough is that these are stories we are reinforcing over and over and over and over again in our head and thinking that we can't get out of them. We can get out of them. We just have to slowly start changing the way that we're thinking about specific things and whatever it is we want to change, whether it's You want to floss every day. Well, make it so that floss is in front of you. Go get I've seen easy ways to do it. As there's so much baggage with food, and especially people who are obese or overweight, it takes on a whole world of its own. I mean, it becomes a monster, and it's the exact same little tasks. It's the exact same, okay, today I'm going to choose this type of food because it fuels my body better. And those are the small little things that we can do. And then it becomes your narrative. I'm a healthy eater. I remember post-surgery, maybe about a year and a half or so, I started a new job. Actually, it was actually less than that. But the people around me always would comment on how healthy I ate. I had told myself for so many years that I was unhealthy and I was a fat person, even though I had really always ate very healthy, but I had these witnesses in front of me. I mean, not always ate very healthy, but I'd say 5 years prior to surgery. And then afterwards, I've eaten quite healthy. I had these people around me telling me my new story, which was I was a healthy eater. And so it was a really great moment for me because they got to own that. And there was external validation for me around, and it was helpful. And I think that as we grow, we do see that can be helpful, but it's not the whole story. I had to do the action first. I have always been considered an athletic person. Even at 275 pounds, I was considered an athletic person because of I was always out there moving my body, even though, and I tell people today that I didn't play sports growing up. That wasn't an option for us. I grew up very poor and we didn't have the means to do those kinds of things. And so I basically just found moving my body was so helpful for my mind. And I reinforced that.
I think that some other things that I have been thinking about since you were talking is I have no discipline. I'll never get it right. So this, again, I said it before, like this victim mentality or poor me, or it's really tied to what people believe about themselves and what we think, and not just food and not just fitness, but what are we capable of in terms of change? And I love Atomic Habits, and I think that there are so many great tips in there. And, when we think of the shame trap that people get into with food, a lot of times I try to normalize it's just food. But when food is like morality to a lot of people, I tend to think a whole lot deeper in terms of, okay, well, what is the meaning that you created? Because really, when I think of a narrative, it's the storyline that we attach to our experiences, but it's also the story that we create about ourselves and who we think we are. The other thing I would say is our brain is a meaning-making machine, right? So I will ask a lot of times, what does that mean to you? So it sounds silly to go, what does pizza mean to you? Well, before surgery, pizza was everything to me. Now, I could take it or leave it. And yes, we could end up having it once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month. And I make it at home now.
And I would absolutely agree with you, Kristen. I think that there's definitely, when we look at the way that we eat foods and how we celebrate foods and how we put some foods on pedestals, it's definitely the opportunities for us to prepare and be part of our new narrative. I have always loved to cook. It's been something that I have enjoyed since I was a young child. I have some extremely fond memories of cooking with my mother and my grandmothers. And, and some of the fun things that we made together. And so I bring that thinking and I bring those memories along the journey with me. And so when I create food with my husband or we create food as a family, I make sure to try to bring those positive memories along the way and not feed into the negative, oh, you shouldn't be eating that or you shouldn't be doing that. And that's the way I'm trying to heal who I am and heal my relationship with food. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly. And I was looking back. So, you and I run a support group. And so one of the things I get an opportunity to do is work and coach some of these wonderful women And I look back on the ones that have been here for multiple opportunities, multiple sessions, and we're no longer focusing on food. We've moved beyond the food issues because they have done some of the early work that's really foundational. Now, they may still have regain that they need to lose, but they understand that the food is not the enemy here, guys. It is not the enemy. It's the habits and the narrative that we are continuing to tell ourselves around food. And so therefore we have to shift that. How do we shift that? We shift that by walking in a different truth. And we have to create what that is. One of the things that you put out there is breaking it down. What are the facts, right? What are the facts? Example, I ate pizza last night. So the narrative is that I have no discipline. I'll never get this right. Or it could be, I enjoyed pizza with my family. Bond. What's the narrative that you're telling yourself?
A lot of people are telling themselves, I messed up. I failed. I gave in to a craving or an urge or whatever. And you're right. There's a story. And when you were even talking a little while ago about the experience with your family, it reminded me of something I wanted to share. Someone from our group a while back had shared a story that was very important to her about her family, payday, and Chinese food. And it was something very sacred, and something she looked forward to. And she always associated, Chinese food with not just payday, but with getting to go out. And, that reminded me of someone else who had remembered her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. And I have a very distinct memory. And over the years, my family has had very different meals for like Christmas Eve and stuff. But there was this one Christmas Eve, I don't remember what exactly was special about it. I don't even remember how old I was, but I remember we had Italian sausages in hoagie rolls with peppers and onions. We're not Italian, so I don't know why. And I know that since surgery, I had attempted to make that once. It was never the same. And so I'm like, oh, whatever. But it was the memory of that made me want to make it again. And so that's the other thing that I think people have is memories of food that tie them back to people or tie them back to experiences. And that is that sense of belonging and togetherness and love, because food is connection in a lot of ways. Food can be connecting, and it's not the only thing, right?
And that's where we have to find the alternative. So when you talk about the Chinese food in the restaurant and the connection, and so I think that where it backfires on us is when we are living in our lives and things go wrong. Where are we going to comfort ourselves? We're going to find that food and go comfort ourselves in Chinese food. And is it innately wrong that we had that experience? No, it was a great experience. But how we're using it to comfort ourselves, 2 days a week because our work was hard, because we're trying to numb out. Then we have to dig down. Okay, how do we do it differently? How do we find something else that we can comfort ourselves with? And those are the tools then you got to dig deep in your toolbox some days. I mean, sometimes it's easy. You just go for a walk, you drink a glass of water, you take a deep breath, you do a little meditation, you say, Francis, you are enough, and move on. Right. But there's other days where you are in the trenches and it is tough. And you may just succumb to that urge or that craving. And then it's, okay, one meal is not going to make me fat. And I had to remind myself after I got to goal that over and over and over again. And that one weekend, one meal, one vacation, it's what am I going to do when I get home? And that was the pre-surgery person versus the post-surgery person where it was so different. The pre-surgery person, I went on vacation, we were off the rails. And then when we got home, I stayed off the rails for another 2 or 3 weeks until I shamed myself into going on diet because the world had exploded because I probably gained 10 pounds. And so there's the shift in the thinking and the shift in the changing and the shift in how am I going to do it differently now? I don't need to comfort myself because I had a bad day. I don't need to comfort myself with food because I had a bad day. I can comfort myself in other ways. And sometimes I go to bed. It was a bad day. Let's move on. Let's just go to sleep.
Can you comfort yourself with a bath or like a face mask or,
Sure.
you know, I recommend people, and I'm going to give this tip here. You've heard me say this on calls. Make yourself a self-care basket. I will say this is a whole lot easier for women than it is for men. Sorry, guys. But, you know, put some crayons and coloring books in there, some color pencils, some nail polish, some hand lotion, right? So I think that self-care basket does not have to have anything to do with food. And I think at the end of a hard day, people say, I deserve this. Why is it always food that we deserve? Because I don't think in my phrase about this is you don't have to earn food, right? It's not something you deserve. It's something that we just have because we're going to eat. We have to change the narrative around that because then food becomes a reward and it's not a punishment or a reward. But when we treat it like that, it just goes back to that diet mentality.
It really does. And we do utilize food for celebration. And that is something that is very historical. And it's something, you know, when we have abundance, we celebrate. It's from thousands and thousands and thousands of mankind years. And so I see where we've made the connection of celebrating ourselves with food on a daily basis. And this is where we get an opportunity to change that, to make that narrative different on a daily basis.
To that point, I wanted to take it a little further, to go back to what you said about comfort food, because I agree with what you said that when you're having a hard day, we've got to learn how to comfort ourselves differently.
Yes.
But in a totally different, because we're heading into fall when we're recording this. And I know around American Thanksgiving, I tend to have conversations with people about mashed potatoes and mac and cheese and really carb-heavy foods.
Yes.
And I'm not saying don't have these things, just same thing with what you were saying about French fries. It's also know thyself. I think we really need to know ourselves and what are triggers for us versus what we can handle in terms of certain foods. So I have run into individuals who have said, oh, well, my family does mac and cheese or mashed potatoes is a comfort food. And I am of the belief that all foods fit not at the same time. I'm of the belief that we can verify our comfort foods. So my comfort foods, when I think of comfort foods and I think of foods that are comforting, they're not what people may consider traditional comfort food. I don't think of baked goods as comfort foods because I've shifted my thought around it. Most of my comfort foods have a protein in there because that's part of the identity shift that I made, was that it really needed to support me, not just comfort emotionally, but to support me holistically. And so I'm not trying to push my beliefs or way of being on anyone else, but we do have to look at how are those comfort foods and the foods that are particularly comforting not serving us. And if we have an abundance of them, it can be harmful. So when we're able to look and lean into that reality and be honest with ourselves, it's not about cutting out those foods, but maybe crowding out, right? More of a crowding out, which is a principle or philosophy in dietetics that I'd learned from somewhere, but some, where you have multiple foods on the plate, but instead of having half the plate of mac and cheese, it's a small serving. So you're crowding out. So for me, and I'm going to name some things like pot roast, comforting, meatloaf, comforting, right? And I put vegetable, like, sure, could there be mashed potatoes in there or some type of carb? But it's, again, what I would consider well-rounded. I have, you'd have veggies in there. You'd have carrots and onions and, some other, maybe some squash or some green beans or some broccoli so it's more, I tend to think of those things as comforting. I tend to think of butternut squash soup, right, as comforting. So when we're asking ourselves as bariatric patients or those on a weight loss journey on GLP-1, where can I create this win-win and still have comforting foods that serve my body, that serve my goals, that serve my health? That's the mindset shift. That's the mindset shift.
I am absolutely in agreement with that. And for so many of us, we've got to shift comfort food out of our vocabulary, really, and think of it no longer. I was sitting here while you were speaking, I was thinking, what do I consider comfort food? And I thought to myself, I no longer think of any food in my diet or what I eat my meal as comfort. I like foods. I do. I enjoy eating foods. And there are times where I use food where I'm stressed to bring my system, to a more even keel, to regulate my nervous system. Absolutely. I think that that's understanding what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I've had a really tough day and I'm going to come home and I'm going to consume the foods that I normally eat. That is going to calm my nervous system down. I try very, very, very hard not to let them be cakes, candies, sugars, cookies, and almost never do I eat those items in a stress response any longer.
So I want to clarify something, because one of the things that I just looked up really quick is let's look at comfort food versus using food for comfort, because I think an operational definition is really, really important. So, this question of, do you ever reach for mac and cheese or ice cream and call it comfort food? But is it really comfort food, or are you using food for comfort? Big difference. So here's what I consider comfort food, and I'm not going to go into foods per se, but it's more of foods tied to culture, nostalgia, and joy. So when I think of fall, I think of cinnamon apples. Now, I would not, to your point, and come home and go for cinnamon apples in response to an emotional, frustrating situation. And so I'm therefore not using that food as comfort, but I would consider it a comfort food that I would make as part of a meal, as part of a gathering, as part of a holiday, that I would consider comfort food. And I want to make that distinction for our listeners, because what I'm saying is there are people who talk about, oh my gosh, I've just made this comfort food, and it is, let's say, bariatric friendly or something like that. And it could be grandma's chicken soup, right? It may create love and safety. But I don't know anybody who's run into grandma's chicken soup after they've had a long day, or holiday cookies being tradition and connection. And I'll even tell you, because some people talk about comfort food, and, if we're talking about cookies, one of the things that I've done is, I don't even think my kiddo knows this, I've swapped out the half to 3/4 of the sugar out of any cookie recipe I do, and I swap it for stevia or Swerve or one of those things. And what's really fascinating is he will enjoy the cookies, but he won't go back until they're gone. But if I make the cookies with only sugar, they're gone. And what I have noticed, and he doesn't know the difference, what I've noticed is I think it's a dopamine response. So for anybody out there, totally off kind of topic, a little bit of the narrative, but I find that it works. But it's when, going back to this comfort food versus using food for comfort, understanding the differences in those terms and how you relate to food and to yourself. And comfort food is about meaning and how it carries an emotional or relational anchor, which is very different from turning to food to soothe or regulate, which is what I think you were talking about. But yeah. So, but if I were to say, are there any specific comfort foods that culturally or traditionally hold a special space, versus eating chips after work or eating cake alone to, avoid something, right? I think that's using food for comfort. But when I think of comfort food, I guess that's a little different. And I'm thinking we can make those comfort foods very friendly, but that's different from I'm using
them to comfort. Yeah. And I appreciate that definition, because I believe that that's one of we do get caught up in that a little bit, because we're trying I believe you and I and the women that we work with, and even those that are, the nutritionists that work with bariatric patients and those on GLP-1s and things like that, we're trying to shift the narrative about food and about good, the bad, the ugly. And really, there are times in our lives where food is culturally what we do. And there are times in our lives where we are going to use food to comfort ourselves. And it's recognizing that for exactly what that is. And so this is a bigger conversation, I think, in so many ways that we are
maybe we come back to that later. Maybe
I know.
Back to that later.
I think
and get back to our storytelling because
because I do think that there is, because we do it not only with food, we do it with, am I a person who exercises? Am I a person who gets 8 hours of sleep at night? Am I a person who hydrates enough? Am I a person who has a loving relationship with their family? And it is hard to be in a loving relationship with your family when there is dysfunction and trauma in that family. I speak from personal experience. And when I am dealing with those in my family that are difficult to deal with, I have to remind myself that they're coming from a place of their truth and their narrative, and their truth and their narrative is different than mine. We may have grown up in the same household, but I promise you the stories we have are totally different and the experiences we have are totally different, but I have to love them where they're at. Some of them may not be my best friends. Or sometimes being in a relationship with your family is not possible. But that's one of the things I strive to do, is to make sure that I'm creating a narrative when I get around them that makes me a loving, caring, compassionate sibling and daughter, mother and wife. That's the only thing I can control, is what I can control. The rest of it is outside of my control. And I can choose to put myself in those environments often, or I can choose to put myself in those environments infrequently. And depending on the person, it depends on what I choose to do. So that's another narrative that we tell ourselves, oh, they don't love me, they don't like me. Walk into that relationship loving yourself. Walk into that relationship liking yourself, and the rest will take care of itself. And if they resent that and they don't honor that, move on.
And I, oh my gosh, the narrative in relationships, that can cause some emotional eating. That can cause some stuff, because I see frequently where people will be in a tangled web in their relationships, and the rules, the traditions, their beliefs about who they should be, around who they need to be, around who they're not. So there's guilt, shame, and blame. There's a ton of these spinning and narratives, and relationships in general are hard. Like just putting it out there. And when we don't have the bandwidth to deal with those relationships, or to be honest, either with ourselves or with other people, it does bleed into our relationship with food. And sometimes we don't even know who we are. I cannot tell you how often I've worked with people that have said, I'm a chameleon. I'm a chameleon because I'm a different person in all of these different areas of my life, because that's how I've survived. And so when you think about that, it's, do you even know who you are? Now we're coming back to identity, right? Do you even know who you are? But the narrative shapes the identity. I know I have many parts of me, and I know those parts very well. But what's interesting is, at the very foundation, I'm still me. And that is aligned with now my eating behavior, because I'm not eating in response to life or situations. You know that saying, you may have heard it, eat to live or live to eat. Like, I think that much of my life was live to eat, because that was how I soothed, because I hadn't learned any other skills. Yes, it was safety. Yes, it was comfort. It was so many things. And when I learned eat to live, food lost its power. It didn't have its hold over me. Like, food is food is food. And before, it was, I have to have it all. I have to have it now. And I think part of that, again, coming back to diet mentality, I think we'll probably mention it in every episode because it just permeates so much of life and how we dictate how we walk in the world. It's, oh, should I order this? What are people going to think, right? Should I order this? How is that going to impact my body? Am I good if I order that? So I think that's spinning a story. It's spinning a story around meal prep. What are the stories that people spin around? Oh, I don't have time. And I do recognize there are people who don't have time. So how do you break it down? How do you make it easy? What are the stories that you're spinning around why you can't reach your weight loss goals? What are the stories that you're spinning around why you can't or don't trust yourself? And one of the things that I think I want to challenge people to is the word I can't, or the phrase I can't. It hits a brick wall, right? And a lot of the I can't are really choices.
Yes. Oh, I would say 95% of the I can are choices. Unless you have physical inability to do something, that it is a choice to not do something and to not make time. If we can make time to go through a drive-through to pick up food that's not serving you, then you have time to go to the grocery store and pick up a ready-made salad or, a rotisserie chicken. And that's a choice. You are making a choice right there to choose unhealthy versus healthy. And certainly there are times where drive-thrus are a necessity and you're making that choice. And you got to make the choice while you're there too. Those are choices. If you're making the choice to veg in front of the TV at night or scroll on social media, you're making that choice versus getting on your tennis shoes and going for, a 10-minute walk.
Well, what's the story that, and I don't know, but these are questions that, we're essentially putting out there for people to answer. And this is why it's so important. Self-inquiry, self-exploration and self-inquiry is really, really important. If you're not asking yourself these deeper questions, and for some people, they may be tough questions, you are not doing yourself any service. You have got to be asking yourself deeper questions with regards to not why. Don't ask why. Why is not a good question. Why it ends up leading you back to that brick wall, right? Why and I can't. Right? Why can't I? It doesn't serve you. It doesn't help you facilitate change. What will help you to facilitate change are what questions, right? What is this doing for me? Or even how? How is this growing me? How is this supporting me? How is this keeping me stuck? What am I telling myself? What is the story that I'm spinning? What is the narrative that I'm telling myself about my worth, about my body, about anything? And I'm going to segue just for a second and talk about body image and weight, because people can spin a story that, because this is true, and I did experience some extent of this, and even in my dissertation research, I had a lot of women tell me I was valued more. I noticed a shift after surgery, after my weight loss, that people wanted to hear what I had to say more when I was thinner. But the people didn't say that, like, oh, you're more valuable now because you're thinner. It was just an observation that they made. And it's an observation that I've made, is that living in a smaller body, people do tend to value you more. So I can see that people would spin a story. And I remember I did. It was, oh, I'm not getting this promotion because, I'm ... I'm not being looked at for this raise because ... Or people think I'm lazy because ... So, and then lazy can become a self-fulfilling prophecy if people start identifying as lazy. So how you refer to yourself, what story you're spinning, what story you're telling, the narrative is huge. I can remember working with several people different times where it was about loneliness. And it inevitably went back to childhood trauma for different individuals. And yet, what also showed up in these different narratives was I have to isolate myself to keep myself safe, because when I'm vulnerable, I'm rejected or I'm abandoned. And what I noticed was that they were conscious about making this decision. It was a very primitive, but it was a story that I'm lonely, I'm destined to be lonely, I'm always rejected, I'm always unwanted. And it was like, wait a minute. But it was because they couldn't handle the discomfort of the rupture and repair process in relationships. So I know I just used some terms that some people are like, what are you talking about? So in any relationship, it doesn't have to be marital. It could be a friendship. Mm-hmm. We go through processes, and even in the therapeutic relationship, if somebody's in therapy, you will have experiences where you're disappointed in that person, or they've said something to offend you, or they've hurt your feelings. And that's called a relational rupture. But a lot of when we talk about rupture and repair, we tend to think about them in terms of attachment and like childhood attachment to adults, or a relationship like an intimate partnership, marriage, that type of thing, romantic relationship.
Yeah.
Rupture, repair. Well, if folks are not able to handle or they're not emotionally mature enough to handle, the rupture and repair process, or there are a lot more ruptures and problems or things like that than there are repairs, it can significantly impact how they see relationships in general. So then they're like, oh, well, I'm rejected, or I'm not worthy, or nobody wants me. But how is that narrative tied to potentially their childhood trauma? And this is where I say, go to therapy for your childhood trauma if you have it, because that could be impacting your relationship with food, your relationship with others, and your self-belief. And, we don't do therapy in our group, but I will make psychoeducational connections with people. And I refer people to therapy all the time. I'm like, you need to process this in therapy, because we're a psychoeducation coaching group. We're not a process group. We're not a therapy group. Stop what we're doing here. But if you need to process this, if you've got to go get some EMDR or something, or to go do some process work, get yourself a therapist if you don't already have one, and do that. But how that comes back to the story is they're then using food to soothe because they're unfulfilled, not just with themselves, but in their relationships, at work. And they're creating these stories and these narratives that are honestly, they're bullshit, but they're so tightly knit and they're so woven into the fabric of what they experienced way back then, that's why the therapy is needed, to kind of pull these things apart for them to see, I'm not my childhood trauma. I'm not what happened to me. My parents may have, done some really horrible things, or they may have done the best that they could with what they had, or my parents should have never had kids, or whatever, right? And yet you're still here. You heard me say this before. None of us have a time machine. None of us are going back in time to change the past. You can process the past. And what's the story, the BS story that you're telling yourself now that's continuing to perpetuate poor habits, right? Unhealthy decisions, the poor me story that you need to shift in order to make behavioral changes. A lot of times people want to make behavioral changes first. And while I respect that, I will tell people, like, we can make these changes, but you've also got to kind of like, it's almost like tilling a garden, right? You don't plant seeds and vegetables on an untilled garden. Do you know what I mean?
You can't, and what you're going to get is something subpar. And so, I think that people are listening to these podcasts. I think most people, stumble upon the podcast, and they're probably listening to them in somewhat of a chronological order, not jumping around. But regardless, if you are, I wouldn't say triggered, but if you are realizing some of this stuff is really hitting you deep and it is really talking to you, there's where you need to take the opportunity to take a look and say, okay, this is a space I need to do some work on. Or if you continuously are having the same conversation over and over and over again about things that have happened to you that are or are still happening to you, and you're caught in that loop, that negative talk loop or the negative story loop, that's the place. If you don't know where to start, I'm helping you decide where to start. That's where you start. That negative, I can't do this, or I can't do that. Because it's the I can't statements, or I don't want to, or I am not willing to. Then you got to start looking there. So then you can decipher what is the most important thing. And a lot of times the most important thing is to just put your foot in front of the other and move in a forward direction. And it may be making a phone call today to talk with a therapist, or it may be signing up for a support group, or it may be getting a book and start reading either one of Kristen's books or something about how to get in tune with your own personal journey.
Yeah. And I also think that one of the things that I think is really powerful is actually like narrative therapy, like shifting your story. I had done some of that in my past, and I think journaling is a great way of doing that. And I actually created a journaling course with that in mind. This is not a pitch. There are so many things that you can do. You can read about things. You can read about, different stories, and you can also rewrite your own story. What is it that I want to see? Who is it that I want to become? And, a lot of people don't know, and those can be scary questions, because if you've never asked yourself those questions, if you've not ever been introspective, you kind of don't know where to start. And one of the questions that I ask people a lot of times, which could really impact your narrative or your story, is what is healthy to me? What is healthy? Because a lot of times we're utilizing someone else's story of healthy. So if you were to go online and you were to, let's say you follow 5 or 10 influencers, which it's not necessarily a good idea or a bad idea. It's that you're going to get different versions of health, right? And they might be different standards of health. And we want to look at, what are you buying into in terms of standards of health? Is it weight? Is it body composition? Is it mental health? Is it how successful you think they look by the pictures that they post? Is it by the recipes they post? Is it by how their kitchen looks? Is it by, social assumptions that you've made based on what they share? Because let me tell you, we're all flawed human beings here, right? Like I tell people, there's no ivory tower that any of us are sitting in. Like, we all have life issues. We all have life problems. And good Lord, we all poop. Like, we all go to the bathroom. So like, when you put people on pedestals or food on pedestals, like, stop it, because we're all human. And this isn't about, bettering. It's about acknowledging that we get value from different places. Yes, that's great. But we also want to know, what story are you buying into? Because that story that you're buying into, the things that you are looking at, they're giving you something. And I'm not saying anything, good or bad about anybody, but everybody has a different experience with regards to what they're posting and what they're seeing. And so if you see someone, because I've seen harmful things, and I saw a post, this was like a year ago, where there was some vegan influencer, I don't even know who it is, who ended up passing away or something. And then there was alarm bells going off. We have to look at what's healthy for you. And when you eat a certain way, when you move a certain way, does that change your numbers? What does your medical team say about that? Does it change your body composition when you eat a certain way, right? So this kind of comes back to that idea of bio-individual nutrition, or it's not my phrasing, it's not my term, it's someone else's. But when you eat for your body, when you're moving for your body, I'm not a runner, never going to be a runner. I don't have the knees for running. I'll be a swimmer. I'll do strength training. You walk a lot. You may even run.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're different. So what's really important is that we're not following cookie cutter advice. One of the things that I really do, and you know this, that I do in my practice is I encourage people to find what's best for them. I will say, for the love of all that is holy, stop looking for somebody who does it and you can copy them. That's the thing that drives me nuts, is like, you followed this diet, it didn't work. You followed that diet, it didn't work. You followed this. Stop it. What works for you, right? We all need high protein, but somebody may be vegetarian. Great. How do you work that into your plan, right? So somebody else may say, well, like me, I don't like salmon. Well, guess what, Kristen? You don't have to eat salmon, right?
That's right.
You have to find a way that works for you. But the more that we live in that space of, well, I can't do this or I can't do that, right? And once again, there we go with those can'ts. What can you do? What can you do that sets you on the journey, that not just sets you apart, but moves you ahead to where you want to be? And if you're not exploring your own desires, your own goals, you're missing out, because this is not a cookie cutter journey. And if you're treating it like a cookie cutter, friends, you're not going to get very flippin' far. You're just not.
And you are absolutely right. And if people are looking for where to start, because I think that can be how do you change the narrative? Let's talk about where you start. And I like the journaling. I mean, one of the best workshops I ever did with a group was a journaling workshop. But if you need to know, like today, where could you start today? Join our Facebook group. It's a private. Is it private? Yeah, it's
private.
It's a private group.
The free Facebook group, Bariatric Mavens.
And it is, you join it, and every day I post something on there that asks some questions, and there's almost every day, there's typically a question that you can answer, and that's a place to start. You know, if you don't know where to start, that's a great place to start, because it's all focused on your health and wellness journey, your post-bariatric journey, your post-GLP-1 journey, whatever weight loss journey you are on. I feel like, because a lot of times people don't know where to start. So I just kind of, as we're wrapping up.
I like that because, you know, and I think that's important. I'm more of like a big visionary, right? And you're bringing it back to like, okay, step one, right? Yes. So, you know, step one is, another way of doing this is, okay, if you're not moving at all, how can you move for 5 minutes a day in a way that makes your body feel good? If you're not getting the protein you need, where are you in terms of your protein goals, and where can you maybe exceed that? What are some protein choices? And in the files tab of that group, I have a list of protein choices. You know, I have different things like that. So you can go in there and download it, and you can.
And that's why I'm steering people there, because there is a plethora of information. But I was just like, okay, where are you going to start today?
Just one thing. Yeah, we got to go. And I'm giving options. Yes. And so that's the thing that I like to do, is give options. It does not mean answer 3 questions or take 5 steps. It's that there's going to be one thing that really speaks to you. And because we're all different, I like options. Maybe that's my ADHD brain. I like options. Not too many options, but I like options in terms of, where do I begin? And it could even be asking, how do I take care of myself differently? How does this version of me support me in getting to that next step?
Yep. And I think that asking those questions, getting out of the negative narrative and moving in a forward direction. And I mean, that's what I got. That's what I got, Kristen.
I have 2 other things that I want to share. And that is, and these are questions, is what is the narrative or the story about myself or my weight that I'm ready to release, that I'm ready to let go of? Mm-hmm. And what is the supportive story? What is the supportive story or narrative that I am ready to create about myself? And it could be, I'm trustworthy, I believe in me, I can do this, one step at a time, right? So what is the story that I want to release about myself? And what is the story that I want to rewrite, create? Because that's the shift. That's the shift. And it's not going to happen overnight. And I know this. I'm urging you all to commit to a new story and every day reinforce that new story of self-belief, of encouragement, of commitment. And this isn't about taking away your binky. It's about building skills and supporting you to make healthy changes and to celebrate the changes that you're making. That's what I got. Okay. All right. Remember, this episode was all about the narrative. I will put Bariatric Mindset Mavens in the show notes, sending you a ton of love. Thank you, Frances. And I look forward to us having another episode together soon.